What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of The Optimal presented by FTN Network. We are here live on a Wednesday, 2:04 p.m. Eastern Time, a little bit late today, but trying to get some new things added to the stream. We have a lot of friends at FTN Network that like to pizzazz our production up, so we have some cool new stuff that I'm trying to implement here on the back end of the production side. So bear with me as I try to work those things out, but also hopefully you guys enjoy them. We have a cool little intro that I'm going to be doing each and every day. And you know what? Here it is right now.
Every day, DFS players set out in search of the perfect lineup.
Great Scott!
To help you craft the best lineup in the land, FTN's Kyle Murray is here to take you through one of the most powerful tools in the DFS world.
That's what I do. I drink and I know things.
It's The Optimal with Kyle Murray.
That's pretty cool stuff there. Shout out to our guy Thomas at FTN that does the audio for those things. He's done it for a couple of guys now at FTN, and it's really cool. It makes me feel like I'm on a radio show or like a really high tech type show like that. So it's pretty cool, pretty badass. So appreciate that, Thomas. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, that's the new thing that we added. I had another thing that I couldn't figure out how to work as well. So hopefully tomorrow we'll have that under wraps. But yeah, for today we're gonna be taking a early look at Week 5. I mentioned yesterday that I took a quick look yesterday at Week 5, but none of my projections or ratings were in. Those are in the optimizer now. Ownership will probably be added later tonight or tomorrow, so we won't be able to take a look at that. But on Friday, we will take a look at that. And so for today, we'll take a more in-depth look at Week 5. I guess a more in-depth first look at Week 5 anyway. We're also going to look at last night's preseason slate. FTN subs and a couple experts absolutely crushed preseason NBA yesterday. Shout out to our guy Josh, who does the minutes projections for preseason. That is a tough job to do, and he's doing it very well. Shout out to our guy Zach, aka Kawaisenberg, for a nice article. Gave us pretty much everything you need to know about the games there. Joe Metz was in the Discord up until lock, so shout out to Joe for that. And yeah, I mean, the guys over there grinding preseason. I had a decent night, not as good as our new expert Connor, who's been putting in his exposures in the cheat sheets over there at FTN. He banked $25K, which was the top prize in the $15 DraftKings tournament last night. So in that $15 tournament last night, we had an expert in first, a subscriber in second, and a subscriber in third. So that's pretty much all you can ask for, right? Like that just shows that the stuff's working. So that was a very cool night to witness and to see. So shout out to those guys. It was our guy Tyreek in second, and then Weston was in third. So great night from an NBA perspective. And preseason, it's just now starting. Last night was night 2, and now we got night 3 tonight. So we're gonna take a look at some of the stuff from last night. Maybe see if we can get a feel for what we should expect for Week 3. Sorry, not Week 3, but night 3. Now, again, I'm not really doing a lot of the content for preseason, so I'm not going to really give out a lot of picks or anything like that right now. But I'm just going to take a look at Week 2 or night 2, and try to get a feel for maybe some trends or some things that we should keep our eye on for potential preseason patterns or trends. But we're going to do that, and then we're going to do some PGA stuff. We're going to go through the optimizer, take a look at the PGA projections and ratings and ownership and all that stuff, and see if the optimizer is producing any of the the top plays. Obviously, we're going to generate an optimal lineup like we're going to do on most shows, whether it be for a past slate or a future slate. We're going to take a look at a future slate for this one, but see if we can find some of the top plays based on the projections, based on the ratings, and all that good stuff. So I typically have a PGA article every week, and typically it would be up by now, but I was a little late getting to it, so it'll be up a little bit later today. So again, I've done some research on the PGA slate and all that stuff, so have a better feel on that than preseason, to be honest. But again, let's just hop right into it. We're gonna take a look first. We'll take a look at NBA first. Just give me one sec. There we go. All right, so NBA is on the screen now. This is last night's slate. Keep in mind, it was a 4-game slate. So this is last night's here. Let's take a look at some of the top scorers. Number 1 was Kevin Porter Jr. That was the guy that Joe Metz was very high on. Josh had him at, I think, 24 plus minutes, which is a very good minutes projection for preseason. And then Kawaisenberg mentioned him in his article as one of his favorite rookie or not rookie, but younger plays from that Rockets team. He mentioned not really getting a ton of exposure to the Rockets veterans, and he wanted those younger guys, and Kevin Porter Jr. was one of those guys for him. Julius Randle and Zach LaVine were two guys that pretty much everyone was high on at FTN. Like Tom Thibodeau likes to play his players in the preseason till they don't need to play anymore, and he'll say when they don't need to play anymore. So Julius Randle got a lot of run there, 41 points, second highest scorer on the board. Guy that you probably needed to have or definitely wanted to have. He was a little bit more expensive than someone like Kevin Porter, who is probably a must-have. But yeah. Zach LaVine, John Morant, Javonte Green, D'Anthony Melton, Lonzo Ball, Alex Caruso, Nikola Vucevic, Taj Gibson, Jordan Nwora or some other top scorers. Gibson was the guy that some of the FTN guys got on a bit more after Nerlens Noel was ruled out. So shout out to those guys for being able to get on that news. Caruso was a pretty interesting play. I forget who it was, but it was Kawhi in his article. He said he wants at least one Chicago player in every lineup. And that was because the new head coach over there, Billy Donovan, said that he wanted to see how this new fit, like this new look team was going to mesh together, right? Like a lot of new pieces. Like Vucevic joined the team last year. Obviously, Lonzo Ball joined the team. DeMar DeRozan joined the team. Caruso joining the team. So they wanted to see how that new look team was going to gel and how they were going to mesh. And so that was a good key indicator as to maybe them getting a lot of minutes here. So have Mets do the voiceover. That's funny. Our guy Tom did the voiceover. He does it all himself. He does the voice. He finds the clips. It's pretty impressive. What are we able to make of Jordan Poole's hot start? That's a good question. Jordan Poole's always been a guy that's been there for DFS for us. That guy, whenever he gets the run, he produces. That's for sure. But we'll dive. I'm not sure if they're on the slate tonight, but we'll dive into it. I'm sure our guys will write him up if he's on the slate tonight, and we'll take a look at some of the minutes projections there. But Mayo quickly went for 30. Another DFS darling there, Jaren Jackson Jr. So this Milwaukee and Memphis game, we were kind of talking about it last night in the Discord. Which, by the way, if you aren't in the Discord and you're an FTN sub, you should definitely get in there because obviously if you're a sub, you get access to it. Go up to the FTN Daily screen and hit chat right here. And it'll take you to whatever screen you need to be at to be able to join the Discord. It's very, very valuable stuff. Being able to have access to everyone talking about that stuff, and not just experts either. We have a lot of good subs that talk about great topics. They raise great questions. They have good opinions of their own, and so it's a really good community to be in. So if you're not in that, you should definitely be in there. But last night, this Memphis and Milwaukee game actually got canceled after the third quarter because someone pulled a fire alarm. First of all, if a fire alarm is getting pulled in a basketball game, in a preseason basketball game, it's either some kid trying to be funny or it's a DFS player or someone that has money on the game. That's just how it goes. I know I mentioned yesterday some of my conspiracy theories. That I don't even know if it's a conspiracy theory. I think a lot of people can get behind that. It was either a kid trying to be funny or something, or it was someone with money on the game. That's the only explanation. Because it was a false alarm, and they brought people back in for a minute. They wanted the game to play, but Milwaukee was like leaving the facility. We have reports of like Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton walking out of the arena with like a bunch of barbecue, which is funny because obviously they were, I believe they were in Memphis. Yeah, they were in Memphis. So you go to Memphis, you got to get some good barbecue, right? So that was funny. But we were talking and we were like, if you didn't like monitor the slate, if you just played some lineups and you didn't really follow any of the games, you would have gone back and been like, wow, that's a really low scoring game. I wonder what happened. And how come, these people only got a certain amount of minutes. And yeah, because it's like it wasn't as reported of a game. Like if that would have happened during a regular season game, we would have had the ESPN push notifications. It would have been on ESPN. It would have been all over Twitter. But it was a preseason game, so nobody really cared. So it was just kind of funny to think that it was like a tree falling in a forest. If you didn't hear it or didn't see it, you would never have known what happened. It was such an odd occurrence there. So I do think that was a pretty funny outcome. And we've had a lot of crazy things happen in basketball over the past couple of years where games like randomly get canceled. Like a basketball game 2 or 3 years ago got rained out because there was a flood and like the condensation was on the floor or something and it was not playable conditions. So a lot of weird stuff has happened in the NBA. So surely it's starting up in the preseason already, which is always funny to see. But let's take a look at what the optimal lineup looked like. Take a look at one lineup. And then I'll talk a little bit about how I got to my lineup. And that'll be based on basically what those guys were saying, right? I didn't really get a lot of time to research or do a ton of work in terms of the slate. I took Josh's minutes projections and turned them into projections that we had in the optimizer. But other than that, I didn't really have like a a ton of time to like sit down and research the slate like those guys did, and they did a great job. So shout out to those guys for that. But a couple of guys that were in the optimal lineup that I had in my main lineup were Jordan Nwora, Kevin Porter Jr., Julius Randle, and Zach LaVine. So those were a couple guys that I had in the main lineups right there. D'Anthony Melton was a guy that was grading out really well. And he was a guy that was extremely contrarian as well. I think it was like 5 or 6% owned. So shout out to Josh for the nice minutes projection on Melton. But also, you had a whole nother quarter where you could have potentially gotten more points from Melton there. So that was a little bit of a bummer, but also, it was still a strong night from him. But yeah, I think that's it. As you can see the optimal lineup there. And again, we'll be back with NBA content today. Josh is going to have the minutes projections. Kawaisenberg is going to have the live stream. One of those guys is covering an article. I'm not quite sure which one, but they're going to have an article, a live stream, the minutes projections, pretty much everything that you could need for a preseason slate we'll have for you guys at FTN Daily. And again, the current situation for the early bird is after last night, we actually tacked on 20 additional spots for this NBA early bird package. So we currently have probably less than 20, but around 20 at $224.99 left. So you can get on that while you still can. And you can use promo code. I always say CURD because I'm trying to say KMER. I'll get it down eventually. Promo code KMER to get additional 20% off. So not a bad deal there. But all right, let's head into the NFL Optimizer. We'll take a look at NFL. So like I mentioned, main slate projections are up. The ratings are up. Projections, ownership projections aren't up yet. Again, doing these early on Wednesday, not really, the most up-to-date numbers. Typically don't have these live on the site until Thursday. But like I mentioned, we're going to do deeper walk-ins or walkthroughs on a little bit on Thursday and more so on Friday. So we'll have a better time to look at the ownership projections there. But we're going to go position by position and just talk about some of the top plays based on the projections. And then we're going to run and see what the optimal lineup would be and just kind of take a look at that way, maybe talk about some potential rules and stuff like that. But at the top of the projections, or at the top of the price, I should say, the pricing salaries, Kyler Murray, number one. Not too much of a surprise. Kyler Murray's kind of been dominating the league so far this year, and he's kind of dominated the DraftKings pricing, continuing to be up there in terms of the price tag, and well-deserved, really. I mean, the guy, last week was his first bad game of the year, and it was like 22 points, I think, or 21 points, which obviously isn't enough if you're trying to, win tournaments with Kyler Murray there, but still, like, he's just so good. He's going to be continually a guy that people are trying to get into lineups, and when they aren't, I think it's a great spot to buy low on. San Francisco don't really have a great feel for the ownership. I don't think it'll be too popular of a game unless we do get news that Trey Lance is going to start, and then we see people flock to Trey Lance. I'm not sure that will be the case. I think there are a couple of other popular options that are going to maintain some ownership, and typically you don't have to worry about ownership at the quarterback spot too much. So again, I'm not really overly concerned about that, but Kyler Murray, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, and Jalen Hurts are the only 4 over 7K. I talked about it a little bit yesterday where we don't really have a lot of those top-end quarterbacks. No Mahomes, no Josh Allen, no Lamar Jackson, no Russell Wilson, no Matthew Stafford. 4 of those guys, I don't know if Stafford's been 7K this year, but the other guys that I mentioned, the other 4 are continuously over 7K. If you ever find those guys under 7K, play them. It's a miracle. Like we saw Josh Allen 7K flat earlier in the year, and it was that game he went for 40, and it was just a massive mistake. It's just not going to happen too often. So keep that in mind in terms of the slate construction, like what the slate's going to look like when you have 5 of those guys off the slate in terms of those top end quarterbacks. It's going to open up some more options for those cheaper guys like Trey Lance that I mentioned yesterday. But those 4 names, Hurts, Rodgers, Brady, and Murray, over 7K. Just below them, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, Sam Darnold, Kirk Cousins. Those are the guys 6,500 and over. I mean, Sam Darnold, been amazing. We talked about him yesterday as well with all the rushing upside that he's shown. I mean, you probably can't continue to count on that. McCaffrey, I saw he was at practice today, so he could potentially be back. I think it would be a miracle if he's back, to be honest. That would be him missing, 2 games? Game and a half. And I guess it could happen. McCaffrey is definitely superhuman, but that would be wildly impressive if he is only to miss one game. I would be very surprised if he plays this week. But when he does return, I'm assuming that's going to knock off some of the potential upside that Darnold has. However, McCaffrey does so much in the air that I think it's also fine to rely on that. And he's still under 7K, 6.6. I think the price is fine on Darnold. As for guys in that value range that are projecting decently, Daniel Jones, the guy has just continued to ball out. Like I mentioned yesterday, he threw for 402 passing yards against the Saints last week. Had a little bit of help from an overtime game, but still tough matchup. And to be able to produce like that was pretty impressive. And it kind of maybe opened up some eyes on the Daniel Jones haters. I know we have a lot of Danny Dimes haters out in the world there, and not enough Danny Dimes lovers, I don't think. But 6K flat for Daniel Jones in a matchup against Dallas. The matchup is not one that's been tough, but it's been tougher than last year. As you can see, based on the DVP, they're 31st against quarterbacks. But in general, they are a little bit better than they were last year. Trayvon Diggs, amazing. The guy has, I think, 4 or 5 picks already, and one was taken back for a touchdown. So, the defense is definitely a little bit improved. Still, there are some struggles, and we've seen some quarterbacks have big games. Like we saw Jalen Hurts have a good game a couple weeks back. Darnold had a good game last week. I think it's totally fine to have interest in Daniel Jones again. I will say, though, based on some early numbers, I think this game is going to be one of the more popular games on the board. So that's a little bit in terms of something to monitor. And when you talk about some of the injuries that the Giants have, it might push more ownership to some of those pass catchers there. Taylor Heineke came off a big game last week. He's looking fine this week against New Orleans. Not a guy that I'm heavily targeting. I don't love the matchup. And the two guys that are a little bit cheaper than him, I do like a bit more, Trevor Lawrence and Trey Lance. You can see Trey Lance's projection right there, 21.7, just much higher than anyone else, pretty much in that entire range. So a lot of guys down here that I'm pretty much writing off because I would just rather play Trey Lance or I would just rather play Trevor Lawrence. And keep in mind, it's Wednesday, so it's very early, and this is why this is just a first looks segment. But Jimmy Garoppolo apparently has a chance to play this week, so keep that in mind. But if Lance plays and he starts, I think he's interesting. It'll be even more interesting if Garoppolo's inactive. I know that probably doesn't sound like a big deal, but if he is inactive, there's less of a chance for anything weird to happen, like Garoppolo coming back in, or maybe them doing those weird split snaps and split drives at times. So again, just something to monitor for Trey Lance there. But Trevor Lawrence is also pretty interesting this week. Our fearless leader, I know I've mentioned that a lot because it's kind of like our running tagline for Kevin Adams, but he talked about the pace that the Jaguars had last week against Cincinnati, and it was pretty much flipped on the head from what they've been doing in weeks 1 through 3. They were in weeks 1 through 3, they were the fastest team in the NFL by nearly 2 seconds. And then in week 4, they came back and they went from playing in between snaps about 23 seconds. Last week, they were at 32 seconds per snap. So again, they flipped their scheme on the head. And that was a little bit because they were actually in a competitive game. And also they were really relying on James Robinson last week. So again, I think in a spot where they fall behind, they are going to go back to that fast pace, which is what you want for DFS from both sides of the offense, and then obviously as a defensive matchup. But again, if they're going to continue to be a fast-paced team, I think Lawrence is interesting. And even though he has looked a bit shaky in terms of some of the decision-making and some of the turnovers that he's had, the upside has definitely been there in terms of him being able to put up points, right? He did it in week 1 where he threw for 3 touchdowns. He also threw for 3 picks. But as a rookie quarterback, that's kind of to be expected, right? So I think the upside is definitely there for Lawrence, even with the mistakes. And obviously the matchup against Tennessee has been one that's been good all year. The Tennessee hasn't really stopped anybody. So I think that's another thing to monitor. They just lost to the Jets. So that goes to show how good this team is right now, this Tennessee team. And if they're going to continue to lose to bad teams, it could be a spot where the Jags maybe go in there and sneak in a win, or at least keep it close and at least make this an exciting game for DFS. So yeah, that is something to monitor. And that loss to the Jets, how brutal is that? But on to running backs here. Speaking of the Titans, Derrick Henry, top price running back of the week. He has the highest projection. He has the highest ceiling projection. I assume he's also going to have the highest ownership projection against the Jags. I mentioned it yesterday on the show with the splits tool. He absolutely dominates the Jags. Everyone's favorite highlight of Derrick Henry. Well, actually everyone's favorite highlight of Derrick Henry is him absolutely destroying Josh Norman, which is probably my favorite highlight too. But their second favorite highlight of Derrick Henry is his 97, I believe it was, yard touchdown against the Jags on Thursday Night Football. So everyone likes to bring that highlight into the world, and obviously that's going to bring us into the fact that he destroys the Jags, and that's not the only good game he's had against the Jags. I mentioned he's over a touchdown, over 100 and I think 10 yards or something like that. Definitely over 100 yards per game against the Jags over the last 2 or 3 years. So Derrick Henry obviously in a good spot here, and again, if those receivers are going to be out, once again, potentially another spot where they're relying on him a bit more. And even if they are in, if those receivers are in, if it's going to be a spot where they're going to be heavily favored and going to be in a good game script there for Derrick Henry, I think it's going to be overall just a really good spot for him. Next, Alvin Kamara against Washington. Washington has been pretty brutal this year defensively, especially against the run. So I think this could be a spot to go back to Alvin Kamara, especially if he's going to be lower owned than someone like Derrick Henry. Dalvin Cook. Now this will be the interesting week because last week we had no ownership on Dalvin Cook. We had moderate ownership on Kamara, and we had a ton of ownership on Derrick Henry. Right. This week I think is going to be entirely different because Derrick Henry is going to get ownership. Alvin Kamara is going to get ownership. Dalvin Cook is going to get ownership against Detroit. It'll be interesting to see how people react to Dalvin Cook. Obviously, he's been open about talking about his injury. He talked about it today, this morning, is it this morning or yesterday? He talked about saying, I'm in pain, but playing through pain is part of football. That's what he said. So it's obviously not great, but it's also true. Like, it's hard to imagine a spot where a running back who literally gets hit by massive humans every single play is not going to be in pain, right? Like it is part of the game. So that is something to note, but it is interesting that he's been talking about us openly. Normally teams will try to hide it. They'll try to, make it sound like everything's fine, but he's been pretty open about it, which is cool. But again, if people are going to see that kind of reports and get off of him or not want to play him because he's a little hurt against the Lions, it's a great spot to go to him here, especially if the ownership's going to be down. The matchup's good. I mean, even if he's a little hurt, even if he's a little banged up, it's the Lions. The Lions look absolutely brutal. We just saw David Montgomery run all over them, and he only did it in about three and a half quarters, if that. It might have even only been like 3 quarters, where he eclipsed 100 yards easily, scored 2 touchdowns easily. So again, I really like Dalvin Cook this week, and if he's going to be a little bit lower owned, I think that would be very interesting. Aaron Jones is also a really interesting play here. He kind of got sidelined in the last quarter. I don't even think he touched the ball in the last quarter last week after he fumbled, but I'm not really too concerned about that going forward. The matchup's really good against Cincinnati. We just saw what James Robinson did to this team on Thursday night. Now, Cincinnati had been good prior to last week against the run. They shut down Dalvin Cook earlier in the year. I'm trying to think of the other running back that they shut down, but they've had a couple of good weeks against running backs. So that's kind of inflated some of their stats. So that's one thing to note. Like, we display the DVP ranking in the optimizer, but it's also kind of important to know the context of it, right? So I would highly advise to not just take this DVP number at its face value and go back and look into it a bit more. So, for example, the Cincinnati team, they've been pretty good against the run so far this year, but their DVP does not quite equate to what their DVOA or what their rushing or their yards per carry equate to, right? I think they've got a bit lucky in terms of what running backs are actually doing. So that's a good thing to note in terms of DVP and looking at that. Austin Eckler, he also has a tough matchup against Cleveland, and that one is actually just a very tough matchup, and the DVP kind of confirms that. Cleveland's just been fantastic. Their front line is probably one of the best in football right now. They are very good against the pass, but still they'll hang in there against the run. However, I'm typically less concerned about running backs like Eckler in tough matchups because how involved he's going to be in the pass. So like if he's going to have 9-10 targets, I'm not really concerned about the tough matchup because a lot of those passes, those catches are going to come in open space and are going to be, such high value touches, right? I mean, that's a point for every catch, right? So I think that's a good thing to note about a way that I assess running backs. Saquon Barkley, same thing with as the Cincinnati news, right? Like the Cowboys have also had some good games against running backs in terms of limiting them, but they've also been in spots where the teams against them have thrown a ton. Like Miles Sanders, he had 2 carries against Dallas on that Monday Night Football game. same sort of deal with Carolina, where Carolina last week was forced to just throw a ton. Tampa Bay, they didn't really run a bunch either. So like obviously there's not going to be a lot of fantasy points put up against the Dallas Cowboys when nobody's running against them. And they're still without a couple of their defensive linemen. They just released their starting middle linebacker, Jalen Smith, who, our guy at FTN, Ray G, has been kind of on that case for a while, where Jalen Smith's just not looking like that elite linebacker that he once was. And they finally just said, we're done with it. I mean, it is tough to say that they're going to make the team better, because he was still their starter and they're going to replace him with somebody. So maybe that replacement will be better. But again, it's still tough to really count on that making their run defense a ton better. So again, I think this DVP number for the running backs against Dallas is a bit skewed, just based on the fact that nobody's ran against Dallas, just not because they can't, because they just haven't, and probably because they haven't been able to when they've been down by a good amount, like Carolina was, like the Eagles were. So that's another thing to note. But let's sort this thing by point per dollar projections. I'm curious to see the top value plays. Leonard Fournette, look at that. Leonard Fournette, 5,200. I mean, last week he got pretty much exclusively all the work in that primetime game Sunday night against the Patriots. He with no Giovanni Bernard, he was their pass catching back, and Ronald Jones got very little work. So it was basically the Leonard Fournette show. So that was very interesting to see. James Robinson, number 2 in terms of value. Again, Carlos Hyde was inactive last week, so it'll be interesting to see, A, if Hyde is back, and B, if that's going to be a factor going forward. But based on what we saw in weeks 2 and even week 3, I'm not really concerned about Carlos Hyde. I think James Robinson is a great play this week. I will say I think he's going to be fairly popular, and that is always a bit scary when you talk about a running back on a bad team that is going to be popular. But again, I think Robinson is very similar to someone. Okay, I have to be careful with my words, because I almost said very similar to someone like Eckler, but not that he's Austin Eckler, but he's going to have involvement in the game no matter what. They're going to involve him in the pass. They're going to involve him on the ground. So even if the game falls behind, or even if the Jags aren't able to score a ton, he's still able to make up fantasy points based on his work in the passing game. So I got to be careful comparing people to the gods that are Austin Eckler. But DeAndre Swift is the next best value play. 6,100. He's not really getting the pricing uptick that you might think, but that's after a bad week last week, so maybe that makes a little bit of sense. I think the matchup's pretty interesting here for Swift, and I don't think he'll have any ownership on him. So I will say he's pretty interesting for me this week, and especially if they're going to maybe do on and off stuff with him and Jamal Williams. If that's going to keep the ownership down on DeAndre Swift, I think that's super appealing. Damian Williams going to potentially be the starter here. I mean, David Montgomery's going to be out for 4 to 5 weeks was the initial report, but Damian Williams apparently has a calf bruise or a quad bruise. Sounds like a bad Charlie horse. Obviously, it's probably much worse for a guy that, again, has large superhuman people tackling him every day of his life. But I'm not really concerned about the injury. It sounded like it was nothing significant. So if he's going to be the starter in a spot against the Raiders, Damian Williams is also appealing because historically he's been a guy that is more of a pass catching back. So while that might not translate to him getting 100% of the team's carries, if he's going to get 50 or 60% of the team's carries and then 10 to 15% of the targets, I would much rather have that role than a guy that's going to get 100% of the carries. I know, I'm not saying that I would rather play Damian Williams than Derrick Henry. That's not what I'm getting at. But what I am getting at is that if a guy's this cheap, let's say 5,600, like him versus Damian Harris, for example, right? They're both down here at pretty much the same price, and you can see Damian Williams is projecting better, and he's typically going to project better because he's going to have more involvement in the passing game, especially on a site like DraftKings where you get that point per reception. He gets a big edge there. Naji Harris, next up, still hasn't cracked 7K yet. Naji Harris, despite the very safe floor that he's kind of presented, still yet to crack 7K as an NFL running back. So I think he's pretty interesting again, even in the tough matchup. I'm interested to see where his popularity falls. I mentioned Kamara, mentioned Barkley a little bit. Chase Edmonds popping down there. I know we got some Chase Edmonds fans in the chat. So everyone loves Chase Edmonds in the DFS industry, right? Or in the fantasy industry. He's just a DFS and fantasy darling. It'll be interesting to see if he's able to get a little bit better of a role in games where maybe you're expecting a little bit more competition. If the 49ers can keep it a little bit closer than, say, the Jags did a couple weeks ago, I think then maybe you're hoping that Edmonds has more involvement and you're getting less James Conner goal line carries, right? Or less James Conner run out the clock type work. So that's kind of the hope with Edmonds. But let's take a look at wide receiver. Wide receiver top projected plays: Devontae Adams, DJ Moore, Justin Jefferson, Deebo Samuel, and Terry McLaurin. And those also happen to be the most expensive players outside of DeAndre Hopkins, who's projecting, not so great. And that's partially because of how unpredictable his target share has been so far this year. And I don't think that means he isn't going to have any upside. I think that just means he's going to have a tougher time in predicting those upside games. So that's an important thing to note. Mike Williams, 7,200. That's a big price tag. Oh, wow. 700 more than Keenan Allen. Yeesh. All right. Fantasy point per dollar. Let's check out the top value plays. Curtis Samuel, Jacoby Myers, Jalen Waddle, Antonio Brown, and Josh Reynolds popping as the top value plays. I will say Josh Reynolds was probably the spot that everybody missed on last week. It made sense, right? In the offseason, the Titans go out and they pay Josh Reynolds to come and be their third receiver. He didn't earn the job in training camp. Chester Rogers ended up bumping him down in the depth chart. But when that spot opened up again with A.J. Brown and Julio Jones out, nobody really got to Josh Reynolds. And that was probably it made a lot of sense because he wasn't playing and to start for the first 2 or 3 weeks. He just wasn't playing at all. But, being a person that wants to think outside the box, I probably should have been able to get to Josh Reynolds a bit more in terms of thinking about that. But instead, I just kind of faded the Tennessee Titans receivers in general, which didn't kill me, but didn't really help me either. Like, it was just kind of a wash, except for Westbrook Akina. He was horrible. He didn't do anything. But a couple interesting value plays. Antonio Brown is one. And so, first of all, Antonio Brown seemed like Tom Brady's number one option, and in that Sunday night game against the Patriots, not based on targets only, but based on when they needed a big play or when they needed something, he was looking at Antonio Brown. Late in the game, we know that he went to Antonio Brown in the end zone twice, and Antonio Brown dropped one and lost one in the lights or something. But that was not an indication that Antonio Brown's like the number one here. Like, I wouldn't go as far to say that. It's still going to be a pretty equal split in my opinion, but it goes to show that Antonio Brown's super interesting, and now the price is down on him. A couple of weeks ago when the Bucs played Atlanta, I was very high on the Tampa Bay stack, but I didn't really get to Antonio Brown a lot because he was like basically the same price as guys like Evans and Boyd. Sorry, not Boyd. Evans and Godwin. So now that that's not really the case, I'm totally back in on the Antonio Brown train. I think he's super interesting. I think he's probably one of the better plays of the week, especially if the ownership stays down on him. But not too sold on that. Jacoby Myers, I think, is super interesting. Also another guy getting a ton of the targets, and another guy that looked like Mac Jones' favorite target. When they needed something, they were going to Jacoby Myers. I think he's a very interesting play, and it's a great matchup against Houston. And I don't know if the Patriots really have run away with the game type ability yet. I mean, like we saw what the Bills did, right? Just absolutely housed the Texans 40-0. Didn't even really blink before giving them a chance, right? I don't know if the Patriots can do that yet, and that obviously bodes well for someone like Myers, who they want to stay in the game. They want to be able to pass, have that pass involvement in the game. So that's always interesting in terms of that kind of narrative there. But as you can see, Brandon Cook's also projecting decently well. He's typically going to do that when you have to project him for a 30% target share, even in a tough matchup, even with a bad quarterback who was a third-string quarterback prior to some scandals and some injury. So that is one thing about Brandon Cooks. And then those Cowboys projecting pretty well again. And then you can see Kadarius Toney projecting as a value even after the price increase, right? We saw him play a ton of snaps. We saw him, get heavily targeted. And we saw him look explosive, right? Like, that's kind of what you went out and draft Toney for. That's what you trade up and draft Toney for. You don't trade up and draft Kadarius Toney to sit him on the bench for the first 4 weeks. I don't know what they're doing there, but finally they're getting him some playing time based on necessity with Slayton and Shepard both out. And I just got an update that they both missed practice again today. So if Kadarius Toney is going to be out there as that wide receiver too, in terms of how many snaps he's going to play and how many targets he's going to see, I think that's interesting. We did see John Ross catch the long touchdown last week, but I mean, that's probably going to be Kadarius Toney more often than not. Like, next time Daniel Jones has a long touchdown to one of those speedy receivers, I would probably bet that it would be Kadarius Toney and not John Ross. But all right, let's head on over to tight end, my favorite position. At the top, we have Waller. No Kelsey on the slate. No Mark Andrews on the slate. No Dawson Knox on the slate. Apparently, he's a tight end one. But yeah, a couple of tight ends that we typically like to roster as those cheat code type tight ends aren't on the slate. But Darren Waller, George Kittle. George Kittle's very cheap. He went from 5,900 last week, which was already too cheap, and now he's down to 5,600. He had 11 targets last week. So while it's been a shaky season for Kittle, 11 targets, looking like he's kind of back in terms of being involved in the passing game. Had a couple of drops that he probably needs to iron out. But another key point about Kittle is this is probably going to be a spot where they're going to trail against the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, it's never a guarantee, but when you're talking about probabilities, it's probably the highest probability spot for them to be a trailing team as they've seen all year. So that's always a good spot for the pass catchers in terms of having a little bit more involvement. Hawkinson, Noah Fant, Gesicki, Schultz, they round it out. Let's take a look at the top value plays, and then we'll get out of here from the NFL side of things. Ricky Seals-Jones, Evan Ingram, Cameron Brate, Anthony Ferguson, Jared Cook, top 5 value options at tight end. And again, we're going to run through these plays a bit more Friday on the show at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Again, free for everybody. So if you're watching these, first of all, appreciate you guys watching. But second of all, they're free Monday through Friday. So hopefully you can tune in every day, and we're going to talk about different topics, and you guys can ask questions. If you have any questions about anything, shoot them in whatever chat you're watching in, whether it's Twitch, YouTube, or Twitter. I'll throw them up on the screen, and we'll answer them. We'll talk about some DFS stuff, some betting stuff, some fantasy stuff. We can talk about anything that you guys might want to discuss or have a question about. But as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about some PGA stuff. Let's hop over to the Pga Optimizer here, and we're going to see what the Optimizer's feeling for some of the top plays for this week. Obviously, we took a little bit of a break from PGA with the offseason and then with the Ryder Cup, but we're back here at Shriners in Vegas. We're going to be in Vegas back-to-back weeks, and now in November, we're going to have another match in Vegas with Bryson DeChambeau taking on Brooks Koepka. Brooks Koepka, who is in this field, the highest-priced player in this field, the best odds to win according to this field, and it's actually a pretty strong field, much stronger than the last couple of weeks that we've had. Obviously, it was Koepka being it. Sam Burns, who is looking good. He's back in this one. Hovland, Answer, Webb Simpson. So some of my favorite plays, just from some of the research that I've done, one of my favorite plays is probably going to be Webb Simpson. He is getting some popularity, but he's also kind of being washed out with guys like Answer and Hovland. So I don't think it's going to be a spot where he's overly popular and where you need to consider fading him. A lot of the times when we'll see Webb Simpson gets super popular in courses like these, where they're shorter courses and more of a kind of a plotter's course or a plotter's paradise, really. Webb will pick up a ton of ownership there, and he isn't really doing that a ton this week, so I think he's interesting. But let's take a look at some of the top value plays. Ian Poulter, our guy in the fancy pants, at 7K flat. Brendan Todd, Matt Wallace, Taylor Gooch, Kyle Stanley. Kyle Stanley is super interesting just because of the fact of how good he is with his wedges and how good he is on approach at 6,100. I think he makes a ton of sense there. I mean, you can't pay much less than that. Like the min price is 6K, so you really can't pay that much, that much more for Kyle Stanley. He's very cheap, and I think that makes some sense. If he makes a cut, I think you're paying off that price tag, so I think that makes sense to go there. Let's take a look at the top plays in terms of the player rater. Webb Simpson, Abraham Answer, Harris English, Louis Oosthuizen, and Hideki Matsuyama are in the top 5. The first couple of guys that pop in the player rater as maybe guys that are a bit underpriced are Paul Casey, Joaquin Niemann. Joaquin Niemann at 8,300, he's like a guy I'm just going to play there at that price tag. He's one of my favorite players on the PGA Tour. I don't really think the course is a great fit for him because he is so long off the tee, and he does gain strokes a ton off the tee, but he's also very good on approach, and he's just an overall birdie maker. So I don't mind Joaquin Niemann in this spot here at 8,300, mainly just because he's so cheap. Adam Scott, Ian Poulter, Mito Pereira under 8K. He's been probably one of the best. He's only been on PGA Tour for 2 months maybe, but in that time frame, he's been one of the better golfers off the tee in the entire tour, especially in this field. So I think Mito Pereira is very interesting this week at that price tag. Corey Connors, 8,800. People think of Corey Connors as a great driver of the ball, but it's not really because of distance, right? He's fine in terms of distance, but it's that accuracy. So I think he's going to be in a good spot here. He's always going to put himself in good spots, and as long as he can get that putter going, he'll be fine. But yeah, those are the main plays that really stick out for me. Let's take a look at what the top optimal lineup would be. We have to comply by DraftKings guidelines. Silly me. let's take a look at what the top plays would be based on the optimal lineup, based on the projections here. Taylor Gooch, Ian Poulter, Charlie Hoffman, Cameron Tringali, Paul Casey, and Louis Oosthuizen. So in this one, we're not using anybody over 10K, and we're able to, because of that, able to get 3 players over 8,500 into your lineup. So it's more of a balanced build, less of a stars and scrubs type build. But that would be the optimal lineup for this week based on the projections in the Optimizer at FTN Daily. Another little piece of news about the Optimizer at FTN Daily is the MLB Optimizer is going to be free for the playoffs. So make sure you guys are getting in on that. Again, don't even need to have a subscription. I think you need to have an account to use it, I'm pretty sure. But you can make one for free and then use the MLB Optimizer to your liking to do the showdown. They have the 2-game slates for this year. I believe this is the first year they're doing it, but yeah, they're doing like yesterday they did the Tuesday, Wednesday, and I believe today they have Wednesday, Thursday slates. So it's been pretty cool to see that. But other than that, I think that's going to do it for the show. I appreciate you all tuning in, and we'll be back tomorrow talking some Thursday night football showdown. We're going to run through some rules and some groups and stacking features on the Optimizer to talk about how to build lineups in Showdown. Might have to get David Jones on the show one of these days to talk about Showdown with us. Maybe I'll sneak him in here and get him to hop on tomorrow, but we will see how that works out. Either way, I will be here, as I will, Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Appreciate you guys tuning in. If you want to get a subscription to FTN, you can use promo code KMER to get 20% off. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and like the video. It helps me and us out a lot. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We will see you tomorrow. Until then, good luck, everybody.